Hey guys, it's Dan here, back for my one video that I'll make this entire year. Let's see. So today I wanted to kind of do somewhat of a react video, um, but really I'm just going to use this video kind of as a platform to leapfrog off of, talk about my own thoughts on EU4. So this video is by Matthew Garza. I definitely recommend you go check him out. Seems like a really cool dude. I've been watching a couple of his videos today, but I'm kind of just going to skip through his video, let him make a few points. Maybe I'll respond to a couple of them, and then at the end I'll kind of give my own thoughts if I have any additional to give.
Made me stop playing EU5. It made me stop playing strategy games entirely. Here's why. I have over 1,000 hours in EU4. I only have 107 in EU5. That's just
Yeah, so I've got 2,200 in EU4 and 51 in EU5. Now, part of the reason I'm making this video is because Europa Universalis is one of the few franchises I kind of feel qualified to talk about because I've spent so much time in EU4. The only other game that I even have a comparable amount of time in is Rainbow Six Siege, which I think I was over 3,000 hours. Nothing else even comes close to that as far as my game time. So that's kind of why I have a horse in the race when it comes to how EU5 succeeds or fails going forward. And on the point of quitting strategy games, I've definitely experienced that. You know, you kind of get hyped up for these games, whether it's EU4 when a new DLC was coming out or EU5. You're looking so far ahead that you kind of almost burn yourself out before you even get there. And then once you get to that point, you know, you play for a little while and then you put it down and you're already looking ahead towards the next thing. And that's kind of where I'm at with EU5. I don't feel like the game is quite ready yet. So I find myself just kind of waiting for the next major update. And then, you know, 1.1 came out and you know, it was good, but it wasn't really enough to bring me back. And so I almost feel like a draw to go back to EU4, but I just can't bring myself to do it because I kind of want to do something new after, you know, 2,200 hours.
let me tell you something. There are currently days where EU4, a game released in 2013, has more concurrent players at certain points than EU5 does.
That's kind of crazy, but it also makes sense when you consider EU4 has been out for over a decade and it's had a decade of love and care put into it. Now, you know, EU5 definitely, it's a real strong foundation, but it doesn't feel like they learned much from EU4 when it comes to all the other stuff. You know, EU5 at its core is definitely a much broader experience than EU4 was at its core. You know, I think as players we were kind of hoping for more than just a good core. You know, we were looking for a little bit of the flavor that EU4 had over the course of its lifespan.
Overall, EU5 has lost about 85% of its player base since launch. I was one of them. So what happened? This is a
Me too.
story of patches, of graphs, of a lost vision, and of a hype cycle that is pretty common with all the game releases. Let's start at the beginning. I love EU4. It's a certain type of person who spends 1,000 hours on a single game. You genuinely do it because you're getting paid to do it, not in my case, or because you really genuinely enjoy doing it, which is the case.
I would fully believe EU4 is probably one of the greatest games to have ever come out. It's almost like, you know how chess is still so popular all these hundreds and thousands of years later? EU5 or EU4 is like 680D chess. It's like a massive chess game there's just so much to it. If I had to pick one game and I can only play that game for the rest of my life, I would probably pick EU4.
For most people who get really, really into EU4 or games like it. Now, as someone who was enfranchised in EU4, the lead up to EU5, I was consuming so much content, early access content. There was a Lemon Cake early access video. I was
Love
watching
Lemon
it.
Cake.
There was Dev Diaries. I was reading it. There was a Dev Diaries analysis done by Ludi. I was also watching that. I was spending lots of time getting hyped, reading about, hearing about, discussing on Discord and Reddit, everything that was going to be happening in EU5. I was really genuinely excited for it. To give you an idea, I was
doing the same thing. I'm sure my friends were probably annoyed because I was probably spamming them with EU5 news probably on an almost daily basis. Every time something cool came up in the patch notes, because we were all playing EU4, I was like, guys, in EU5, the economy is going to be so in depth.
changing my sleep schedule so that I was getting more sleep in the week leading up to EU4. So I was going to bed earlier just so when it did come out, if I needed to, I could pull an all-nighter and just play the game nonstop. I was really hype about it. You can read on Discord, there's memes of people whenever a new game comes out, they call in sick out of work or something just so that they can play the game. I was basically doing that to 11. I'm saying
For the record, I think calling out of work to play a video game is incredibly childish, and I would never do that. But I don't know. Do what you want to do, I guess.
all this, just so you know, I was not a skeptic. I'm not someone who wanted the game to do bad. I genuinely wanted the game to do well. I was a true believer. I wanted the game to be everything that it promised it was going to be. I felt like every day there was new footage, new content, new things that we could look into, new mechanics that were being explored that hadn't been talked about, breakdown videos, things like that. Okay, release day, hype, immediate download, we're in. Now, as someone who spends lots of time in EU4, watched lots of content, early access content for EU5, and then immediately jumped into the tutorial because I want to eat my veggies for things like that, I found the new player onboarding experience to be lacking. The tutorial wasn't bad per se, it's just because of the scope of the game, unless you were watching lots of early access content, lots of video breakdowns, and things explaining, and tutorial videos explaining the game before the game came out, you were going to be pretty lost at the start if you just...
So, part of the thing, though, is any of these games, any Paradox games for the most part, unless, like, you would pretty much need, like, a miniature textbook to learn how to actually play the game. Either that, or you just jump in and do it, usually with the help of some tutorials. Me personally, I didn't find the transition that difficult between EU4 and EU5. I watched like maybe one tutorial in EU5, and I was able to kind of figure out the rest just through trial and error because I have so much time and experience with Paradox games. And unfortunately for new players, this just isn't the type of game where you're going to be able to jump in. If you're not hooked by the history or the gameplay mechanics, you're not going to enjoy the game. You kind of have to meet the game halfway. So I would never really expect, even the tutorial itself would take hours and hours to complete if you were starting from scratch. So unless you have that drive, you're just not gonna make it. You really have to meet Paradox games halfway when it comes to actually learning how to play them. There's a reason we call them spreadsheet simulators.
Heard the game, thought it sounded fun. Maybe you're a strategy gamer who wanted to dive into a Paradox title for your first time, coming from something like Factorio or Civilization. Jumping into this as your first title, going in blind, would not have been a good experience. Although, the hype surrounding the game might have made it seem like it was.
Yep.
So, let's jump into my first experience.
I definitely agree with that point. The EU5 is like EU4 on like steroids when it comes to how complex the systems are. Trade in EU4, while still kind of ambiguous, unintuitive, is at its core like maybe like 5 buttons. You assign a merchant, you move a merchant, you build a trading post that makes your trade power go up so your merchant moves more money. EU5 is completely different, which is a good thing, but you're not just going to jump into that. You know, you really have to have a base already to get into EU5. Or like I said earlier, you need to have that pool, the historicity, you know, the gameplay mechanics. If those things aren't pulling you in, you're just not going to have a good time. The marketing definitely did not. Unless you knew, I could see why someone would think this would be a good jumping in point because of the marketing and the hype around the game. Honestly, for a strategy game, the hype was kind of insane. You would not expect. I don't even think like Civ 7 had a similar amount of hype, at least in the circles that I'm involved with online.
My first
And Civ
kind of
7
real time
sucks,
playing
so.
game was a multiplayer game that me and a couple of my buddies did, maybe 5 or 6 of us, the night of release. We all log in, we're all super hype. We know we all loved EU4 and had done multiplayer games before, so we're all excited to join in. We hop on Discord, download the game, queue up, get in there. I'm playing Scotland, start off at a civil war, that'll be relevant later.
That's a brave choice.
Playing the Netherlands, another one's playing Genoa, another's playing Naples, someone's on the Ottomans. I think that's it. Anyway, it's really fun to play Scotland because you start off at civil war. It's not trivial to win, but it's not exactly super difficult either to do it. If you're a human, bunch up your armies, go kill the AI armies. Because of the way revolts work, you're pretty much set after that. In a very stereotypical Paradox interactive gaming experience, we played for about 3 hours, helping each other, explaining things to people who hadn't been as enfranchised, who hadn't been following everything in detail. We quickly realized for our next session, we all kind of were okay just starting again because we'd all made various gameplay decisions, errors, whatever you want to call them. That meant if we had just started over, we would have had a much smoother time. And so we're all like, let's just start a new campaign again as the same country.
That's how Paradox multiplayer goes. You start a new game pretty much every other session, if not every session.
So, restart is where things might go a little off the rails. So to start, after launch, the strategy that Paradox took for balancing, now that tons of people have access to the game, was, I would say, very shotgun approach. People would discover something on Reddit, on YouTube, on the forums. They would post there. People would get angry about a bug, about a stat, or a balance thing. The devs would hotfix it immediately, only for us to then realize that that hotfix broke balance of a different system in a way that wasn't anticipated. I'll use the example that affected us kind of, is unique units. English longbowmen, pew pew. Scottish Highlander, French Musketeer, Spanish, forget what those guys are called. Certain nations would have unique units that were stronger than regular units. Some of them were counted as levies. Now, part of why this was a problem was that the percentage of your unique units that you would get would be based on your population and their strata. So let's just say it was 3%. You would get 3% of your population as English longbowmen. Pretty good. It's a problem with other surrounding nations can only raise 1% of their population as levies. Suddenly you're having 3 times the amount of units, and also they are really good because they're unique units, so you just go around stomping everyone. People quickly saw this, realized, hey, maybe we should tone that down. So it was hotfixed to 1%. This is a problem if you're Scotland and you have unique units and you start off in Civil War, you go from making 10,000 units to making 3,000 units.
The levy system is cool, but it's very unintuitive, and it's not like an EU4 where, you know, EU4 you really felt like you could punch above your weight by taking out loans or, you know, and hiring like mercenaries and stuff. EU5, it feels like if you don't have enough levies to beat your starting enemies, you're just kind of screwed. At least that's how I feel. I'm sure there's ways around it if you're interested enough in like getting specific alliances and tag teaming, and that's all well and good, but coming from EU4 where you could, as the Byzantines, beat the Ottomans just by taking out a bunch of loans and dropping a whole bunch of mercenary stacks on them, the levy system doesn't really feel good. And on top of that, one of the issues I had is, you know, it feels like it takes forever for your levies to actually replenish. And so I would end up in situations like I had a Byzantine game which this is a whole nother issue, but the disasters are kind of ridiculous. I had a disaster where I had basically the countries that I conquered were leaving my country, which was fine. I would just beat them in a war, re-annex, until I realized that re-annexing the country that I had already taken over and, cored in most cases, or I already had cores on at the start of the game, was giving me more aggressive expansion or whatever it's called in EU5. And I got a coalition, within like 2 years simply by re-annexing the territory that I already owned. And on top of it, the same countries kept rebelling multiple times. So I would conquer a piece of land, it would rebel, I would conquer it, and it would rebel again. And my levies just could not keep up. I'm like, you know, how exactly are you supposed to play this? Um, the mercenary system is weird, unintuitive. The mercenaries seem very expensive from my experience. I don't know if I wasn't doing something correctly. Um, but yeah, it's just it feels like if you don't have more levies than you need, then it's really easy just to kind of get wiped out and nothing you can do about it.
Okay, because the enemy rebel nation also has that. But now, when you're facing England, even though their population cap percentage thing was lowered, like yours was, because they're a much bigger nation, this fight just got a lot harder. That's not something readily apparent from the patch notes because it's not balance of Scotland army size changed for XYZ reasons. It's the levy percentage of the population that can be raised changed. And it's not immediately apparent how that will affect everything. It doesn't automatically translate to Scotland is now much harder to play. The patch notes would often say what changed, but not what that meant, unless you had a really high level knowledge or had been playing for hundreds of hours already, like a lot of content creators had. I think this example really defines the early stage of EU5's development. Another example. People who play Paradox games are gamers. Very quickly, gamers everywhere who are playing this and my friend group discovered that it's really efficient to simply have a lot of vassals and subjects. So instead of conquering Ireland and owning it directly, coring it up and spending resources to make it your core territory, you could conquer it, then just create a custom subject. Now, you could make this custom subject one province, and they would have their capital in that one province. And because it's their capital, they'll send out control from there, and they're going to have a much easier time extracting value out of that land than if you were trying to own it directly and then having to core all of those provinces. So what often the meta became is conquer territory, create tons of tiny vassals, and then vassal swarm everyone. This was good because you could eventually integrate them when you needed to do that. And because unlike EU4, where you have a relationship cap, maybe 3, 4, 5, if you're really pushing it, and each vassal takes up one of those slots. In EU5, it uses diplomatic capacity, where a small vassal might take up 0.5 of your 5 diplomatic capacity. So you could really just have 50 small one province minor vassals, and that'd be okay. They wouldn't be upset or anything. Yep. Naturally, this is what the meta became. Everyone just conquered land, made tons of vassals. Another thing that
That's something I figured out early on, just through my EU experience, was how much more efficient it is just to have vassals, especially because of how proximity works. Most of my early games were as Hungary, and even like Transylvania, the meta was just release Transylvania because, the land's nice, but the proximity is so low that you might as well just turn it into a vassal, and then your vassal will actually accomplish more in that area than you'll be able to. So that, and then all the other countries, plus you don't have to deal with the cultural malices, you don't have to convert cultures, you just get a little posse together, and then you're like unbeatable. Vassal swarming was somewhat more difficult in EU4, especially if you started as like a smaller nation. And even as a mid-sized nation, like as Hungary in EU4, getting Serbia, Bosnia, Wallachia, even that necessarily wouldn't win you the battle against the Ottomans, because they would be throwing like 2-3K guys in against the Ottomans 50K. So even then, having a vassal swarm just wasn't as good unless you were like the HRE or France or someone that just starts the game with like 10 vassals basically, and also vassals with high development.
Pretty early on was that centralization, one of the value sliders in the game, was really good. It gave you proximity cost reduction, which made you have more control everywhere, which is really good because control's how you get money, and money's how you get buildings, and buildings are how you get troops, and more troops means more land, means more means more everything. So money's really good. It's usually the bottleneck. Being able to strictly have more money let you do pretty much anything you wanted to do in the game, instead of in EU4 where monarch points are the bottleneck. Centralization, really good. Naturally, we all take all of the privileges that grant centralization. We all take policies that give centralization. We push centralization with our counselors. And then devs knew this because they balanced a lot of the policies that gave centralization with some drawback. So if you had a policy that gave centralization, it might make your peasants upset or your nobles upset or whatever. If you had a policy that gave decentralization, which was bad at this point, you would normally get something good to go with it. So if you took a decentralization policy, you might get more monthly prosperity or more development or something that's good to counteract that. And so we were playing the game the way the devs were kind of telling us to play it, centralization maxing. We'd been playing about a couple weeks, then new patch hit. Okay, new patch rolls around, changes entirely how centralization works. We went from centralization being good, more money, more control, more crown power, to now all of us with our tons of vassal swarm. Centralization really makes your vassals upset. And they also nerfed how good centralization was as a...
I agree with the point he's making. The balance changes just seem all over the place. But I wanted to kind of branch off of that into one of the core issues that I have with EU5, which is how binary a lot of the choices feel. On first glance, the like civics or whatever you call them, the sliders, seem way more in depth than EU4's did, until you figure out which one is the better one, and you just do that. And so you just do centralization. You just do free people versus serfs or whatever, and defense versus offense. You just pick the one you want and you just hammer it. There's not really, EU4 wasn't exactly super in depth. You just picked the idea set you want, but it felt a little more dynamic because of the array of idea sets that you could pick. You could do, as any country, you could do pretty much any strategy. So you would start as Hungary and you could do, what was the one? Innovative, and then offensive and quality, and your army would just be like Space Marines right out the gate, and you could smash the Ottomans. You could do economics. You could do like trade or whatever. You kind of got to tailor the country the way that you wanted to. You could play as Spain and do like a full military rush, go annex France or whatever, and just ignore colonization. EU5, by kind of giving on a surface level, it gives you more options, but it's actually fewer options, because by having them all there at the same time, you are now in a binary system where you just pick the one that you think is better and you just hammer that for the rest of the game. Every time centralization event comes up, you just pick the option that gives you centralization or whatever. It's not as fleshed out as I think it appears to be on a surface level, compared to the almost infinite choices that the idea system provided.
So you got not as much proximity control, you got not as much of the other good stuff that you were actually taking it for. It makes sense conceptually, Sure, your vassals wouldn't love you centralizing power away from them, but it was also, at this time, super meta to just have tons of vassals. Suddenly, we're going from maxing centralization and having lots of subjects, which the game had been telling you to do, by the way, to after the patch, it was really bad to load into a save and have all of your vassals super angry. So it was a double nerf. The thing that you built your empire around, centralization and vassals, were suddenly super bad together. And this was at a point where most people are coming home after work, playing a game for an hour or two, and they make it maybe 10, 15, 20 years. You do that for enough, and you come back mid-save, now it's the 1500s, you have your vassals form, and suddenly they all hate you. That person's not going to be super incentivized to start a new save now that they've been burned a little bit. Looking back at EU5's development since launch, I think it falls into two to three categories. There's the shotgun approach of the early development cycle, where patches were done on the daily, literally. There's the more steady stream approach, which they switched to, where it would be every 3 weeks, every month, we got a solid patch, and people would just have to live with the bugs that kind of festered and got reported, which is okay. It's better than what came before. At the same time, people had to live with those changes that were in that.
So I think part of the problem here is the way that the game was marketed. And any person who's played a game that's as broad as a Paradox game really knows to expect, at least in my opinion, they should know to expect this absolute like hurricane of changes at the beginning of the game. Because as much love and care as they can put into it, you're not just going to find all the issues through in-house testing. It really needs to hit the general audiences in order for all these details to be ironed out, and they will continue to iron out issues until EU6. That's just how these games go. And so I am, in 99% of cases, I am against early access. For survival games, for shooter games, and anything aside from like this kind, any game that's not super duper in depth should not launch in early access. This is one of the few cases where I think releasing in early access would have been beneficial. They probably would not have gotten the gigantic spike that they got right out the gate, but look what happened to that spike anyway. They would have been better off releasing this in a late alpha stage of development so that people know, don't get attached to your saves. We have a really strong base, but it's going to take some work to get it the rest of the way there. Personally, I have no issue with this because the way that I play these games is I pretty much start a new campaign every time I play. The only exception is once I get really good. So typically I'll pick a country like, say, Burgundy, and I'll play them 8 times through the first 50 years till I get the kind of cycle down pat. So I know exactly what I need to do when, so I get the best possible start. And only after I achieve that start will I continue with a save past that point. Basically, I don't want to leave things up to random chance. So like same thing with the Teutonic Knights. I lost to Poland like probably 10 times. And then the 11th time, I finally figured out, all right, this is what I got to do to beat Poland. And I redid that a couple times so that it wasn't just like random luck. And from there, I continued the save. So anyone that's coming into a Paradox game expecting it to work from day one is not being realistic, in my opinion. And that's not necessarily on the player. Like I said, I think the marketing kind of did this game a disservice. They should have released it as an alpha and with the kind of asterisk that, this is still in testing.
If you were playing as a minor in the HRE, say the Netherlands, which is one of the recommended starts for the game, you would quickly get attacked by France, and then attacked by England, and then attacked by your neighbors. There's a couple good videos showing that effect of people trying this as a challenge, but it's Also, probably a big feels bad for someone who wants to jump into the game maybe post-launch. They've done some research, want to try it, log in, do the Netherlands because they're a beginner nation, recommended nation, and then immediately get attacked and don't understand.
I don't know why the Netherlands would ever be a beginner nation. I don't know if maybe I'm just not naturally skilled at Paradox games. Anything that's not like the headliner nations is not going to survive a new player. My friend, when he started his first game of EU4, played as the Ottomans, and he lost to the Byzantines because the game is just not intuitive. You cannot just jump in and be good, much less with a country that's like, three tiles and it spawns next to the strongest country in the game. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. They should have picked, like, I don't know, something else. Something else. I know the options are limited. I don't know.
In playing a small nation, inevitably we're going to consolidate for maybe 50 years and then get attacked by a larger neighbor. This was just how the game went. You could roll back to an old patch where the AI wasn't super aggressive, but then you're playing on an old patch with other bugs that isn't officially supported and isn't even the main patch. Why aren't you playing on the main patch? 1.1 has just dropped. There's army templates. The AI aggression has been tuned to now where there's settings for it. You can have them be passive, normal, or aggressive. There's an economic rework, so things are different there, and there's new content for the German region. Based on what I've seen and me following, it seems like this is the first big patch that's trying to fix things and that has a very clear vision for what it's trying to do. So I'm excited about that. So here's where I am. I have 107 hours in EU5. I have over 1,000 in EU4. And what surprised even me is that when I stopped playing EU5, I didn't go back to EU4. I just stopped playing strategy games. EU5 didn't replace EU4, it kind of just burnt me out of the whole thing. EU5 on launch day peaked at 77,000 players, which is
insane
a lot for a Paradox game. There are days now where it dips below EU4's concurrent player count. Again, a game that is 12 years old. Steam reviews have slipped from mostly positive to mixed for recent reviews. There's a 38-page long thread on the Paradox forums titled, "I genuinely do not like EU5, and that makes me sad." And I think that title captures how I feel. I'm not making this video to dunk on EU5. On the contrary, I really, really want it to succeed. The foundation is genuinely ambitious. Paradox is trying to do something that is a risk. They're trying to give people what they've said they've wanted for a long time. EU4 took a decade of work, DLCs that were very bad, patches that were okay, and then some patches that were not okay. But it took work to become the game that I really, really love. Every Paradox fan knows that. It's a meme in the community that a game is going to come out on launch. It's going to take 5 years of work, and then it'll actually be ready for launch. Not uninstalling EU5, I'm just not launching it right now.
Excuse me. All right, so just some closing thoughts, I guess. As far as the country aggression goes, I think this ties into a larger issue with EU5, where to me, the first 20, 40 years of the game feels like the equivalent of like 200 years in EU4. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that the time scale was expanded, which personally I like. I like having more game. The problem is that Paradox games, especially EU4, are so optimizable that, historically what a country accomplished in 500 years, you can do in like 50 sometimes. And so once you get into that cycle of optimizing your play, that's me. I'm a super optimist when it comes to these kind of games. I'm a little special, I guess. It just feels like 40 years into the game, I've played as much as I need to. And this kind of gets into my broader, I guess, criticism of EU5. This is something that all games struggle with, especially these kind of map painting games. Because at the end of the day, people call them map painters, but if all you're doing is painting the map, that's a pretty boring game. At the end of the day, all games do is waste your time. That's the point of a game. And the moment that you feel like your time is being wasted is when you're going to stop having fun with the game. And so, EU4 did a good job of kind of delaying that feeling out until like the 1600s, maybe the 1700s ish. But kind of once you hit that peak point where you were just a big old blob and you could defeat every other country in the game, and the game just turned into waiting for truces to expire, declaring war, taking some land, waiting for a truce to expire, just cycling between your neighbors, declaring war, taking more land. That's the point where the game just stopped being fun. And, EU5, unfortunately, as deep as the systems in the game are, they don't make the full game deep. The economy is phenomenally deep, but I don't just want to sit there and fiddle with economic sliders the whole time. It's got to support the core of the game, and the systems in EU5 just aren't doing that at this point. How you fix that, I think a good starting point would be adding more flavor. Definitely the interactions between countries, I think, need to be adjusted. Again, it's kind of difficult because, if we want things to progress at a natural pace, just because the game is so much longer than EU4 was, there's going to be a lot less happening. Or else you end up in this situation where France is going to take over the whole HRE by like 1500 or whatever. That's to say nothing of what a skilled player is going to be able to accomplish. What was the world record in EU4 was like 27 years for world conquest. Like, what are people going to be able to do in EU5 with all this additional time we've been given? It feels like there's plenty of deep systems. The economic system is great. I do appreciate the depth of it, but it just feels ultimately pointless. It feels like when I'm playing EU5, all I'm doing is like building things so I get more money so I can build more things. And after 40 years of that, it's like, all right, I'm tired of clicking plus on RGOs and putting lumber camps down or jewelry makers or whatever. You kind of hit that point a lot sooner with EU5, I feel like. And a big part of that, in my opinion, is the lack of mission trees. Initially, and ideas as well, but mission trees, I think, are the main component. I was initially for not having mission trees because I understood the logic was the mission trees kind of railroad the player in a way, because they give you the most optimal play on a platter, right for you to. It's like, oh, you can, as England, get personal unions with every big country in Europe within like 25 years. It's like, well, why would I not do that? And so I was like, yeah, I kind of like it being more freestyle. It's more up to the player to kind of develop things and role play and get the technologies and tailor the world the way that they want it to be. It's very impressive how EU5 almost simulates a living world. It's like the first time I've ever seen something similar to it in a game, which is why I'm so hopeful for the future of the game. When it comes to like natural population and religions and cultures, and there's like actually people instead of just arbitrary development numbers now. It's cool when your citizens are dying to the plagues, and especially the Black Death. It's like, oh man, my people are dying. You actually feel it. It's not like in EU4 where you click a button and it's like, oh, quarantine the port and let them die or whatever it was. So yeah, initially I was for that openness that EU5 was going for, but the problem is, I think now the game is too open. We don't have the railroad anymore, which is, in my opinion, a positive thing. But now there's absolutely no guidance at all. And so the game does end up just feeling like a click on a tile, build a building, get more money so you can build more buildings, try not to die to like a revolt or something. And then paint the map. And it's just it's not satisfying to me. The last few times I played, I just kind of was like done by 1400. Like I didn't feel that drive to continue. That's something that I think the missions added in because you could see the next thing on your itinerary. You could look forward and be like, okay, all right, so I just beat France in a war as Burgundy. Now, to get the next objective, I need to start improving relations with their subjects. And if I do that, I can actually flip their subjects to join my side, and we can take them over. Or is the Byzantines. Oh, if I take all these tiles, then I can get this massive buff to my army, and I'll be able to stomp the Ottomans, the rest of the way. They added kind of a draw forward to the player. Same with the ideas. The satisfaction of clicking that button and getting a little 10% buff to your units, and then when you filled up one of the national ideas, and you're like, oh man, I can colonize like 20% faster. That's freaking cool as heck. Those little systems pulled the player forward, until you got to the point where the systems didn't matter, which is that kind of blob singularity where it doesn't matter what your ideas are because you just have billions of men that you can throw at any issue you have. And you have infinite money, so like colonization doesn't even matter because you can just spam out 30 colonies without even feeling an economic hit because your trade system is so robust and you're bringing in thousands of ducats a month. I'm being a little hyperbolic, but you kind of get the idea if you've played EU4. They need that. I think that needs to be the primary focus because the bugs and all that is secondary to me. The main issue with EU5 is that there isn't the draw forward for the player. And when they figure out a way to implement that, the technology system just doesn't do it for me. I don't know if it's because of the way that they like turned it into like a civilization tech tree. It's not, it's not satisfying to get new technologies like it was in EU4, despite EU4 having a fraction of the options that EU5 has. When you got that new military unit, that felt good. When you were almost at the new military unit, that was like, oh my gosh, let me save up my mill points so I can get the infantry tech 7 up, and then my units will be able to wipe out all these countries until they get caught up to me. The system in EU5 does not have the same draw. And I think until Paradox figures out a way to start to kind of bring that draw back into the game, it's going to continue on this downward trajectory because there's nothing in me right now that says open up EU5, start a game up. I'm just thinking kind of how boring it'll be and how unsatisfying it'll be. I would rather start up EU4, just play something else entirely. All right, I'm going on 50 minutes. Probably going to cut some stuff out. Probably like 2 people will watch this, but who cares? If you're still here, thank you. Maybe hit the subscribe button, maybe hit the like button, and then go over and subscribe and like Matthew Garza's videos because he seems like a chill guy, and I like him, like his content, and yeah, have a nice day. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Bye.